There comes a time when you get tired of watching life slip by while you wait for the perfect moment to feel ready. Maybe that time is now. If you have ever found yourself holding back, double-checking every move, or waiting until you finally feel confident, you are in good company. For years, you may have believed that self-doubt means you are unprepared, that only naturally fearless people get to live boldly, or that you simply weren't built for a bigger life. This book is here to show you something different. Playing small is not a fixed part of who you are, and confidence is not something you either have or don't. Instead, playing small is just a familiar habit, a way of protecting yourself that probably started long ago but now keeps you feeling stuck. Over time, these habits start to shape how you see yourself and what you believe you're capable of. What once looked like a single missed chance slowly becomes a silent pattern of holding back, and little by little, regret piles up while your real abilities lie unused. If you are ready to break that pattern, you do not need more thinking or another round of pep talks. You need a clear way out, a real plan for what to do when doubt, fear, or hesitation show up. That is what this book offers. Step by step, you will learn how to spot the moments when you shrink, name them, and choose something different. You will discover that self-doubt is often just your mind's way of warning you that you are about to do something new, not something dangerous. You will learn how to update your sense of self by taking small proof-building steps instead of waiting for some magic boost of bravery to arrive. You will see how action can come before confidence and how doing even imperfectly starts to shift everything. You will also find ways to restart quickly after a pause, rebuild the trust you have in yourself, and share your real talents with others, even if you're afraid you're not quite ready or perfect. These skills are not just for some special type of person. They are tools you can learn and repeat until feeling stuck becomes a thing of the past. You do not need to change your personality or wait until self-doubt disappears. You only need to try new ways of moving forward, even while you are still unsure. What you build by doing will always be stronger than anything you can imagine while waiting. This book is for anyone who is tired of watching from the sidelines while others move ahead. You are not missing anything except a new way of acting. Read these pages with an open heart, try the ideas for yourself, and let each small step forward be the proof that your bigger life has already begun. Chapter 1: Smallness Trap. Everything you have been told about finding your confidence is likely a complete fabrication. You are not stuck because you lack talent, intelligence, ambition, or worth. You are stuck because you have spent years perfecting the habit of shrinking. Your heart does not need more healing, and your mind does not need more preparation. What you need is to recognize that you have been repeatedly surrendering to self-doubt, choosing comfort over growth, so often that living below your actual capacity has started to feel normal. You are in the right place if you are tired of watching less capable people pass you by simply because they are willing to move while you are still overthinking. By the time you finish this chapter, you will see exactly how you have been negotiating against yourself, and you will understand the sequence required to break that cycle permanently. The invisible architecture of hesitation. Playing small is not a single moment of insecurity or a rare instance of bad luck. It is a behavioral style. It is a deeply ingrained pattern of repeatedly choosing the smaller move when the bigger, more expansive move is readily available. This pattern shows up when you stay quiet in rooms where your voice desperately matters. It manifests when you avoid leadership, ownership, or visibility, even though you know you are entirely capable of handling the responsibility. It reveals itself when you artificially reduce your goals so that failure feels less possible, or when you wait for perfect confidence and flawless timing before you even dare to begin. The danger of this pattern is that over time, it stops feeling like fear and starts feeling like your personality. You begin to believe that you are simply a cautious person rather than a capable person who is currently trapped in a cycle of avoidance. This happens because playing small has both visible and invisible forms, and the invisible forms are incredibly deceptive. You might call your fear being realistic, You might call your endless delay being thoughtful. You might disguise your self-erasure as being humble, or dress up your paralyzing perfectionism as simply having high standards. This problem is notoriously hard to notice because the pattern often looks socially acceptable. People will actually praise you for your caution, your modesty, and your endless patience, completely unaware that those traits are acting as a mask for your fear. You can function perfectly well on the outside, paying your bills and meeting basic expectations, while shrinking badly on the inside. But the core cost of this problem is devastating. You do not merely lose external opportunities, you slowly lose trust in your own size. The deepest damage is identity damage. Every time you shrink, you reinforce the internal narrative that maybe you really are not that person, and maybe you do not deserve a larger life. But recognizing the tightness of this behavioral cage is only the first step, because if you leave it locked, the restriction eventually becomes your permanent reality. The quiet cost of unused potential. Small choices compound into a smaller life. One avoided conversation does not seem like a tragedy in the moment, but repeated over time, it becomes a rigid habit of silence. One delayed decision feels like a temporary pause, but strung together with 100 others, it becomes a permanent style of hesitation. One missed chance is easily rationalized, but a decade of missed chances solidifies into an identity of someone who is never quite ready. Underuse becomes your normal baseline. You adapt to living below your capacity, and your initial frustration slowly rots into quiet resignation. Your vast potential starts to feel theoretical instead of practical, a ghost of what you could have been rather than the reality of what you are building. Eventually, regret becomes far more painful than fear. Fear is a sharp, temporary sting that occurs when you step into the unknown. Regret is a dull, chronic ache that lasts for years, experienced entirely in private. If you continue to play small, you will inevitably start watching braver, though not necessarily better, people move ahead of you. You will see individuals with half your talent and a fraction of your intelligence claim the platforms, the roles, and the lives that you were too busy overthinking to grab. Your relationships will also shrink under the weight of this pattern. Unspoken needs inevitably lead to bitter resentment. Weak boundaries act as an open invitation for disrespect. By keeping your talents hidden, you deprive others of your real contribution, making your smallness a disservice not just to yourself, but to everyone around you. Worst of all, your own ambition will turn against you. You know you are capable of more, and that knowledge creates immense internal pressure. Internal pressure without forward action always ferments into shame. If you do not intervene, self-doubt will become the most believable voice in your head. Repeated obedience makes doubt feel incredibly wise. Your constant avoidance becomes false evidence that you cannot handle more, and your mind starts confusing your lack of action with a genuine lack of ability. Opportunities will feel increasingly not for you. Bigger roles will look dangerous rather than exciting, and visibility will feel like a lethal exposure instead of a natural expression of your gifts. Delay will harden into your permanent identity. The phrase "I am still thinking" will morph into "I am just not decisive." The excuse "I am waiting for the right time" will solidify into "I never really do things like that." The story becomes self-sealing, and the emotional costs escalate into endless comparison, deep bitterness, hidden envy, and the sheer exhaustion of carrying around a mountain of unrealized potential. Unused potential is not a dormant seed waiting peacefully in the soil. It is a trapped gas building pressure inside a sealed container, and to release that pressure, you need a structured escape route rather than random bursts of motivation. The roadmap to your true capacity. The first time you go through this journey, you will achieve a profound shift in how you operate. You will learn to recognize the pattern of smallness in real time, spotting exactly when self-doubt is shaping your behavior and catching the exact moment when the smaller move is being chosen. You will develop the critical ability to separate fear from facts, identifying when a temporary feeling is being mistaken for an absolute truth. You will start acting before confidence arrives, using smaller first moves to interrupt your delay and turn your intentions into undeniable evidence. You will begin repairing your identity, stopping the habit of describing yourself by your old, fearful behavior, and starting to build a larger self-image through repetition. This transformation requires a very specific sequence. First, you must name the pattern, identifying where your life is being made smaller than it needs to be. Next, you will encounter the phase of doubt signals. In this stage, you will experience the immense relief of reclassifying your internal alarms, learning that the discomfort you feel is often a sign of healthy expansion rather than impending danger. Once you stop treating discomfort as a stop sign, you will face the identity gap. Here, you will gain the massive advantage of updating your internal labels, replacing vague self-judgment with active statements that match your true, present-day capacity. With your identity updating, you will master fear facts. This phase gives you the power to slice through emotional fog, allowing you to focus on visible steps rather than getting lost in giant imagined futures. Armed with cognitive clarity, you will embrace the philosophy of action first. You will discover the sheer thrill of moving before you feel perfectly ready, using imperfect action as your main tool to build proof quickly and repeatedly. To ensure this new behavior survives, you will enter the momentum loop. You will learn the critical skill of shortening the gap between decision and action, stopping fear from having extra time to grow, and mastering the art of rapid re-entry after hesitation. This constant structured motion naturally builds self-trust. You will become someone who makes promises small enough to keep, tracks follow-through honestly, and repairs quickly after misses without collapsing into shame. Finally, you will reach the stage of seen anyway. This is where you unlock the ultimate freedom to tolerate visibility, stopping the endless wait for polish and treating public imperfection as the necessary price of a real, expansive life. I chose this specific order because clarity must always come before control. You cannot change a pattern you cannot see. Reinterpretation must come before action, because if doubt still feels like absolute truth, you will keep obeying it. Identity must be addressed before bold behavior can stabilize, otherwise your temporary courage will feel fake and eventually collapse. Action must come before confidence, because confidence is the receipt, not the purchase. Momentum and self-trust must follow to make the new behavior easier to repeat. And visibility comes last, because public expansion is infinitely more survivable after you have built your private strength. This sequence is the exact dividing line between those who merely dream of a bigger life and those who actually have the courage to inhabit one. The dividing line between evidence and excuses. In the arena of personal expansion, there is a stark contrast between the attitude of winners and the attitude of losers. This is not about inherent worth, it is about operational strategy. Winners treat fear as information, not as an instruction. They listen to the alarm, but they do not automatically obey it. Winners let evidence outrank emotion, trusting the proof of their past survival over the panic of their present moment. Winners are entirely willing to be awkward on the way to being strong. They move before they feel perfect. They build their proof through relentless repetition, and they recover with lightning speed after they make mistakes. Losers operate from a completely different framework. Losers romanticize readiness. They believe that if they just wait a little longer, read one more book, or get one more certification, the fear will magically vanish. Losers mistake their endless delay for high-level intelligence, convincing themselves that their paralysis is actually strategic patience. Losers demand absolute certainty before they are willing to make a movement. They wait for their internal emotion to improve before taking external action, which means they are always waiting. They keep explaining their grand plans instead of executing their basic tasks. They fiercely protect their comfort and have the audacity to call it a strategy. The challenge before you right now is a matter of profound contrast. You must decide whether you want temporary relief or permanent growth. You must decide whether you want to collect excuses or collect evidence. You must decide whether you will keep serving the smaller, fearful version of yourself, or if you will finally put in the work to build the larger one. Waiting for perfect readiness is like standing at the edge of a rushing river, waiting for the water to stop flowing before you decide to cross. The water never stops. You simply have to learn how to step into the current and keep your balance while the pressure pushes against you. Stepping into that current requires a fundamental shift in how you interpret the resistance you feel, because the opposite of playing small is not arrogance. The choice to stop shrinking. The opposite of playing small is not noise, performance, or reckless bravado. The opposite of playing small is self-honoring expansion. It is telling the absolute truth about your capacity. It is becoming someone who can feel the heavy weight of doubt and still choose to move forward. You do not need to undergo a personality transplant to achieve this. You do not need to become an extrovert, a stage performer, or a ruthless competitor. You simply need a different behavioral pattern. By now, you have seen the invisible trap that has held you back. You understand that your hesitation is not a life sentence, but a learned protection mechanism that has outlived its usefulness. You recognize the heavy, compounding cost of your own delay, and you can see through the disguised excuses that have kept you confined to a life that is too small for your spirit. You know that the solution is to stop negotiating with the voice that demands you stay hidden, and to start building a new operating system based on evidence, action, and internal credibility. You do not need to eliminate every single doubt before you make your next move. You simply need to become someone who moves anyway. You need to build a life that is organized around pursuing truth rather than avoiding discomfort. You now see the trap clearly. You recognize the heavy cost of your own hesitation and the disguised excuses that have kept you confined. But recognizing the cage does not automatically open the door. Even with this newfound clarity, the moment you attempt to step out of your familiar smallness, your nervous system will sound a massive, terrifying alarm. It will feel exactly like impending disaster, but that alarm is hiding a massive secret about your potential. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe to Grow to the Top and activate notifications to receive more self-improvement tips that will supercharge your growth. And make sure to give this video a thumbs up and share it with your friends. It really helps the channel grow. Thank you for your support. Chapter 2: Doubt Signals. The most destructive lie you have ever been told about your own potential is that fear is a stop sign. You have likely spent your entire life believing that when your chest tightens, your mind races, and a heavy sense of dread washes over you, it means you are about to make a terrible mistake. But what if that internal alarm is completely broken? In this chapter, you will discover why your mind is ringing the panic bell at the exact wrong moments, and you will learn how to decode this internal noise so you can finally move forward. You are about to see that the discomfort you have been running from is not a warning of impending failure. It is the exact sensation of your own growth. The false alarm of the familiar. Self-doubt cannot be defeated if it is constantly misread. A false alarm will control your entire life if you treat it like a final verdict from a wise judge. When you misinterpret your own internal resistance, you turn temporary fear into chronic avoidance. You start believing that because you feel unqualified, you actually are unqualified. You assume that because you feel immense stress, you must be walking down the wrong path. But this is a fundamental misunderstanding of human biology. Your body is not protesting a bad decision. Your body is protesting a positive change. The human brain has a massive, hardwired bias toward the familiar. Predictability always feels safer than possibility. The known often beats the better, simply because the known feels easier to control. This is exactly why people stay in cramped, frustrating patterns long after they have outgrown them. When you step toward a bigger role, more visibility, or higher responsibility, you are leaving the familiar zone. Your nervous system detects this unfamiliarity and immediately processes it as a threat. It responds by increasing your heartbeat, flooding your muscles with tension, and creating a restless urgency to retreat to safety. This physical reaction is what we call self-doubt, but it is rarely a reaction to actual danger. It is almost always a reaction to expansion. The key interpretive shift you must make right now is separating your physical sensation from objective reality. The thought that you feel afraid does not equal the fact that you are doing something wrong. A much more accurate and useful reading is simply that the situation feels unfamiliar. The new question you must ask yourself when the panic sets in is not what is wrong with me, but rather what is expanding here. When you reframe doubt in this way, you reduce an enormous amount of unnecessary suffering. Fear becomes infinitely easier to tolerate when it is named accurately. You stop making every internal wobble into a deep character judgment. The emotional intensity drops the moment the story changes. You realize that your internal alarm is like a car alarm that goes off because a heavy truck drove by, not because someone is actually breaking into the vehicle. The noise is loud, but the threat is an illusion. The readiness illusion. To master this new interpretation, you must abandon the myths that have kept you paralyzed. The first and most common myth is the belief that if you doubt yourself, you must not be ready. You have been conditioned to believe that readiness is a feeling you achieve before you begin. In reality, readiness is almost always built through contact with the work, not confirmed beforehand. Many of the strongest, most commanding performances in human history began with intense nervousness. Doubt is not a disqualification. It is simply the entry fee for doing something that matters. The second myth is the assumption that confident people do not feel this internal resistance. You look at people who are playing big and assume their internal world is perfectly calm. It is not. Confident people frequently feel fear, but they have developed an entirely different relationship to it. They have learned not to obey every internal signal their body produces. They understand that confidence is a behavioral trait, not an emotional baseline. They move while the fear is still speaking. The third myth is the trap of reassurance. You might believe that if you just get enough pep talks, read enough books, or gather enough external validation, the problem will be fixed. Reassurance may calm you briefly, but without forward action, the doubt always returns. Relief is not the same thing as rewiring. You cannot soothe your way out of a pattern that requires movement to break. The fourth myth is the exhausting idea that you need to argue with every negative thought that crosses your mind. Endless internal debate keeps your attention glued to your fear. It is like stopping a vital presentation to argue with a heckler in the back of the room. The more you engage, the more power you give them. Some thoughts weaken much faster when they are simply labeled as noise and bypassed entirely. Not every anxious thought deserves a trial in the courtroom of your mind. Decoding the internal siren. Understanding the theory is useless unless you can apply it in the exact moment your chest tightens. To do this, you must use the signal check method. When the doubt spikes, ask yourself 3 sequential questions. First, ask what got bigger here. Look for the hidden expansion. Are you facing more visibility, more responsibility, or simply a higher degree of uncertainty? Second, ask what your mind is predicting. Your brain is likely predicting catastrophic exposure, humiliating failure, or painful rejection. Third, ask what is one real move you can make right now. This could be sending one message, making one firm decision, or taking one visible step forward. If the panic is still loud, run the situation through the unfamiliarity test. Ask yourself objectively if the situation is actually dangerous or if it is just unfamiliar. Then ask yourself a pattern-breaking question. Would this exact scenario still scare me if it were already a normal part of my daily routine? If the answer is no, then the fear is entirely manufactured by the novelty of the situation. Finally, ask yourself if you are mistakenly reading your own expansion as a problem. You can also use a built-in reflection tool called the 3-line reset. Line 1 requires you to identify exactly what changed in your environment that triggered the doubt. Line 2 requires you to write down the dramatic story your mind instantly created about that change. Line 3 requires you to define your next visible action. The crucial element of all these tools is that you must pair your new interpretation with immediate action. Do not stop at insight. A new meaning must lead directly to a new move. If you realize the alarm is false, but you still choose to hide, you are reinforcing the smallness trap. You must convert your recognition of the false alarm into physical behavior that proves the alarm wrong. Calibrating your internal dashboard. To make this process seamless, you need to adjust how you manage your physical and mental state under pressure. Start by asking better questions. Replace the paralyzing question of what is wrong with me with the clarifying question of what feels unfamiliar here. Replace the victim mindset of why am I like this with the curiosity of what growth is this reaction attached to. Replace the impossible goal of how do I stop feeling this with the practical strategy of how do I move correctly with this feeling present. Before you even attempt to read the signal, you must calm the body. Slow breathing reduces the false urgency that your nervous system is generating. A short walk can interrupt a mental spiral before it takes root. A slower body almost always creates a more accurate mind. You cannot think clearly when your biology is screaming that a predator is in the room. Once the body is slightly calmer, use the technique of labeling and redirecting. State clearly to yourself that this is self-doubt. Acknowledge that this may simply be a stress response to leaving your comfort zone. Then firmly declare that you will now choose the next step. You must also watch your timing. Doubt almost always spikes right before you take the action. That sudden spike does not mean you should retreat. It is not a last-minute warning from the universe. It often means the action matters deeply to you, and the resistance is making one final, desperate attempt to pull you back into the familiar zone. Push through the spike. The danger of overcorrection. As you begin to master this reinterpretation, you must watch out for predictable traps. The first problem occurs when you use reframing to deny real skill gaps. You might start saying it is just fear, when in reality, actual preparation is needed. Do not confuse courage with carelessness. You fix this by pairing your reframing with honest preparation and objective feedback. The second problem arises when you start analyzing every emotion too deeply. Reflection quickly turns into a new form of delay. You become fascinated by studying the signal instead of being guided by it. You fix this by capping your reflection time and forcing yourself to end the analysis with one concrete action. The third problem is expecting the doubt to vanish quickly. When normal fear spikes return, you might feel like you have failed. You become discouraged by the recurrence of the sensation. You fix this by changing your metric for success. You must judge your success by your reduced obedience to the fear, not by the reduced sensation of the fear. If your hands are shaking but you send the email anyway, you are winning. The fourth problem is confusing real danger with growth discomfort. Not all fear is false. Sometimes a situation really does require caution. You fix this by checking the actual evidence, weighing the real-world consequences, and identifying the controllable factors before you act. When you apply these principles correctly, the outcomes are life-changing. At a baseline level, you will start recognizing your main triggers and stop personalizing every fear response. You will feel significantly less confused by your own internal resistance. As you get better, you will become able to pause without freezing. You will easily separate your body sensation from actual risk, and you will start making incredibly clean decisions under pressure. Ultimately, you will reach a point where you can enter bigger rooms without automatically shrinking. You will start seeing self-doubt as mere background noise rather than a commanding authority. You will develop a stable, unbreakable habit of interpreting discomfort as the exact path to your possible growth. You will no longer be a prisoner to the false alarms of your own mind. But even when you master the art of reading these signals perfectly, you might find yourself freezing for a completely different reason. You might step into the bigger room, decode the panic flawlessly, and still feel a crushing weight pulling you backward. This happens because of a silent, invisible mismatch deep inside your own mind. You have grown, you have the skills, and you know the fear is a lie, but a hidden part of you is fiercely protecting an outdated version of who you are allowed to be. Until you uncover and destroy this invisible tether, every bold move you make will feel like a fraud. We will dismantle that tether next. Chapter 3: Identity Gap. You might be entirely qualified for the exact life you are actively avoiding. You have likely spent years acquiring skills, gaining maturity, and waiting for the right opportunities to finally appear. Yet, when those opportunities arrive, you freeze. You pull back. You let someone less capable take the lead. You do this not because you lack the ability to execute the task, but because of a silent, invisible mismatch deep inside your own mind. You have grown, but your internal narrative has not. You are operating a highly capable mind using an entirely outdated operating system. In this chapter, you will discover why your self-image is lagging years behind your actual reality, and you will learn the exact mechanism required to force that internal story to catch up with who you have actually become. The invisible anchor of the past. Old identity is one of the strongest hidden forces behind the pattern of playing small. You may have the skill to speak up, lead the meeting, or launch the project, but you completely lack the self-permission to do so. You know exactly what to do, yet you fiercely resist doing it. The issue here is not your competence. The issue is your self-concept. Identity determines what feels natural to you, not just what looks logically possible. If a larger move contradicts your internal story, it will feel wrong, dangerous, and deeply uncomfortable, simply because it does not match the old version of you. Human beings have a desperate, hardwired need for internal consistency. We will defend familiar identities even when we actively dislike them. If you still see yourself as timid, junior, unready, or not leadership material, you will unconsciously sabotage any behavior that threatens those labels. You might tell yourself that you are just better behind the scenes, or that you are not the kind of person who takes up space. These outdated labels act as an invisible anchor. You do not rise to the level of your talent. You fall to the level of the self you still think you are allowed to be. This creates a massive amount of internal friction. You experience the emotional cost of this lag every time you do something bold and healthy, only to immediately feel like a complete fraud. You pull back after rare moments of courage because the expansion feels like a violation of your own personality. You end up living with a constant, exhausting sense of almostness. You are almost ready, almost there, almost the person you want to be. But identity is essentially behavior memory. Your self-concept is built partly from your repeated actions. If your actions stay small, your identity stays small, no matter how many books you read or how much you secretly desire to change. The myths of inner transformation. To break this anchor, you must stop believing the comforting lies you have been sold about personal transformation. The first myth is the belief that identity changes through insight alone. You might think that if you just have the right psychological breakthrough, your entire self-image will permanently shift. Insight is valuable, but it only opens the door. Repetition is what actually walks through it. Real identity change requires hard, undeniable evidence, not just a temporary feeling of inspiration. The second myth is the assumption that if bold behavior feels unnatural, it must be fake. When you step into a larger version of yourself, it will feel incredibly awkward. You will feel like an imposter wearing someone else's clothes. But new does not mean false. It simply means underpracticed. Growth always feels awkward before it feels authentic. If you retreat the moment something feels unnatural, you are guaranteeing that your old identity will remain in charge forever. The third myth is the paralyzing idea that you should wait until you fully believe in yourself before you take massive action. This is a complete reversal of how human psychology actually works. Belief usually follows proof, and proof requires action. Waiting for belief keeps the old identity alive because you are depriving your mind of the exact evidence it needs to update its story. You cannot think your way into a new identity. You have to act your way into it. The fourth myth is the deeply ingrained belief that identity is fixed. Many people treat their old traits as permanent, unchangeable truths. They say things like, "I have just always been this way," treating their history as a life sentence. But identity is partly trained. What is practiced becomes normal. If you have practiced hesitation for a decade, hesitation is your normal. If you begin practicing decisive action will eventually become your new normal. Confidence is not a mood you wait for. It is a construction process you actively manage, building a behavior-based self. To construct this new self, you must conduct a thorough audit of your current labels. Think about the words you use to describe yourself in moments of contraction. Identify where each of these labels came from. Often, you will find they were handed to you years ago by a careless teacher, a stressed parent, or a former version of yourself who was just trying to survive a difficult season. Ask yourself objectively whether these labels still match your current capability. You will almost always find that you are fiercely protecting a definition of yourself that expired a long time ago. Once you identify the expired labels, you must build a behavior identity. This means replacing vague trait language with highly specific action language. Instead of trying to convince yourself with the empty affirmation that you are confident, you must define yourself by what you actually do. You tell yourself that you speak clearly even when you feel tension. You define yourself as someone who makes one clean decision a day, or someone who sets boundaries despite feeling nervous. You make the new identity measurable through action rather than leaving it as a vague, emotional target. This requires proof-based repetition. You must choose one specific behavior that directly contradicts your old story and repeat it consistently. If your old story says you hide, your new behavior is to publish your work or speak up in the first 10 minutes of a meeting. But doing it is not enough. You must record the evidence rather than relying on your memory. The anxious mind has terrible amnesia for success and a photographic memory for failure. If you do not document your bold actions, your mind will simply erase them and revert to the old story. You can manage this by keeping a mental or physical ledger of evidence. On one side of this ledger is the old identity, the outdated label that tells you to shrink. On the other side is the new evidence, the specific, undeniable moments where you acted in support of the stronger self. When the old story resurfaces and tries to convince you that you are weak, you do not argue with it using empty positivity. You review the ledger. You present your own mind with the undeniable proof of your recent actions. You must also use identity language very carefully. Avoid inflated, grandiose self-talk that has absolutely no proof behind it. If you tell yourself you are the greatest leader in the world, but you cannot even send a difficult email, your mind will reject the affirmation and your self-trust will plummet. Use grounded language that stretches you but still feels believable. Aim for honest expansion, not theatrical reinvention. You are not trying to become a completely different human being. You are simply trying to become the most capable, unhindered version of the person you already are. Navigating the awkward transition. As you begin to build this new identity, you must rely on verbs, not vague adjectives. Adjectives are static and highly dependent on your mood. Verbs are active and completely within your control. Do not focus on being brave. Focus on the verbs. Decide, ask, lead, publish, finish. When you focus on the verb, the action becomes smaller and more manageable. Track your proof, not your mood. Your mood will fluctuate wildly during this transition. Some days you will feel unstoppable, and other days you will feel like a complete fraud. Evidence accumulates regardless of your mood, and your long-term identity trusts accumulated evidence far more than temporary feelings. You must fully expect awkwardness. New identity behaviors will feel incredibly unnatural at first. When you finally set a firm boundary, your voice might shake. When you finally claim your space, you might feel a rush of guilt. That feeling is not a verdict on your worth, and it is not a sign that you made a mistake. It is simply the physical sensation of transition. It is the friction of the old identity scraping against the new one. Tolerate the awkwardness, because it is the only bridge to the other side. You must also stop introducing yourself through your old pain. Many people constantly repeat their limiting self-definitions in social situations. They joke about their awkwardness, they preemptively apologize for their lack of experience, and they broadcast their insecurities to make other people comfortable. Every time you do this, you strengthen the old identity. You must speak about yourself in ways that your future actions can actually honor. Stop handing people the instruction manual on how to underestimate you. There are several predictable traps you will face during this transition. The first is attempting to create a grand identity with absolutely no repetition behind it. A new self-story might feel deeply inspiring in the moment, but without repeated action, it is incredibly flimsy. A few hard moments will shatter it completely. You fix this by tying every single identity claim to specific, repeatable proof behaviors. The second trap is shaming your former self. As you grow stronger, it is tempting to look back at your old, fearful identity with disgust. You might treat your past hesitation as weakness or stupidity. This creates an internal war rather than facilitating actual growth. You fix this by respecting the old identity for what it was, a past protection strategy that kept you safe during a time when you did not have the tools you have now. Thank it for its service, and then firmly relieve it of its duties. The third trap is expecting instant inner alignment. You might act boldly once and expect a permanent, magical change in your self-image. When the old story inevitably returns the next day, you become deeply discouraged. You fix this by remembering that identity changes through relentless repetition, not through dramatic, isolated moments. The fourth trap is confusing imitation with identity growth. You might try to copy someone else's exact style of confidence rather than building your own stronger self. This creates massive internal strain and deep inauthenticity. You fix this by modeling the underlying principle of their courage, not the specific flavor of their personality. You do not need to be loud to be powerful. You just need to be undeniable. The new normal. When you commit to this process of evidence-based identity building, the outcomes are profound. You will begin to notice exactly where old labels are quietly driving your current behavior, and you will start questioning identities that once felt as fixed as gravity. You will feel significantly less trapped by your own history. As you accumulate more proof, you will begin speaking, deciding, leading, and setting boundaries much more naturally. You will stop feeling like your bold behavior is just an act. Your self-description will become vastly more accurate and far more expansive. Eventually, you will reach a point where you genuinely identify as someone who can handle visibility, pressure, and growth. Your bigger behavior will stop feeling exceptional and will simply start feeling normal. Your life will finally expand because your identity no longer demands that you remain small. You will have successfully closed the gap between the person you are capable of being and the person you allow yourself to be. But even with an updated identity and a clear understanding of your own capacity, there is a silent saboteur waiting in the wings. It thrives in the fog of your own imagination, turning vague worries into paralyzing monsters that can stop your momentum in an instant. To defeat it, you must learn to separate the sensation of panic from the cold, hard reality of the room. Chapter 4. Fear Facts. Have you ever noticed how a shadow in a dark room can look exactly like a terrifying threat until you finally reach over and flip the light switch? The human mind is an absolute master at filling empty spaces with terrifying shapes. When you lack clear information, your brain does not just leave that mental space blank. It actively fills the gap with imagined catastrophes, worst-case scenarios, and exaggerated risks. You have likely spent years making major life decisions while standing completely in the dark, allowing these imaginary shadows to dictate your behavior. In this chapter, we are going to turn on the light. You are going to learn how to dismantle the habit of making choices inside an emotional fog. We are going to slowly reveal how to separate your physical sensations from objective reality, your vague worries from actual probability, and your temporary discomfort from genuine danger. You are about to build the capacity for calm, precise, reality-based judgment under immense pressure. The architecture of an illusion. Playing small becomes incredibly easy when your fear remains vague, unnamed, and unchallenged. Unnamed fear is like a gas. It expands to fill whatever space you give it, seeping into every corner of your mind until it contaminates your entire perspective. When a risk is left undefined, it feels infinite. You cannot fight an infinite threat, so your natural response is to freeze or retreat. But when a risk is specific, it becomes manageable. It transforms from a terrifying monster into a simple math problem. The core issue is that many people mistake their emotional intensity for factual importance. You have been conditioned to believe that the louder a feeling is, the more true it must be. If your chest is tight and your stomach is in knots, you automatically assume that the decision in front of you is a terrible mistake. This chapter is designed to break that illusion permanently. Decisive action depends entirely on clean interpretation. If you treat every feeling as undeniable evidence, your action will slow to a crawl. But if you learn to test your fear against cold, hard facts, movement becomes infinitely easier. This is exactly how courage transitions from being a reckless impulse into an intelligent strategy. The mechanics of emotional reasoning. To understand how to defeat this fog, you must first understand how your mind creates it. There is a massive difference between a physical sensation and an objective reality. Feeling tension in your shoulders does not prove that you are in danger. Feeling uncertainty about a project does not prove that you lack the capacity to complete it. Feeling internal resistance does not prove that you are heading in the wrong direction. Yet, your brain constantly conflates the two through a process called emotional reasoning. The mechanics of emotional reasoning are deceptively simple and highly destructive. Your mind starts with a physical feeling, usually triggered by leaving your comfort zone. Because the brain hates unresolved tension, it immediately creates a narrative to justify why you are feeling that way. It tells you that you are feeling anxious because you are about to fail publicly and ruin your reputation. The trap snaps shut when you mistake that newly invented story for an absolute fact. You say to yourself that you feel unsure, therefore this must be the wrong path. This cycle thrives in ambiguity. Undefined goals create a thick mental fog. Undefined risks create wildly exaggerated fear. Undefined next steps create total paralysis. The antidote to this paralysis is the power of precision. A clear, highly specific question produces a much smaller problem. A smaller problem produces a cleaner, more obvious move. And executing a cleaner move instantly restores your personal agency, dismantling the myths of certainty. Before you can apply precision, you must abandon the myths that keep you trapped in the fog. The first myth is the belief that more thinking will automatically produce clarity. You assume that if you just analyze the situation from 10 more angles, the right answer will magically appear. But much of what you call thinking is actually just repetitive rumination. Repetition strengthens your emotional certainty without adding a single drop of actual truth. Structured, bounded thinking always beats endless, circular thinking. The second myth is the assumption that the best decision is always the one that feels the easiest. Easy is a dangerous metric. Easy almost always means familiar, and familiar is exactly what keeps you playing small. Growth decisions usually contain a high degree of discomfort. The question you should be asking is not whether a choice scares you, but whether it is wise and aligned with your ultimate potential. The third myth is the illusion of vividness. The anxious mind is a talented, Oscar-winning dramatist. It can paint a picture of your failure with terrifying, high-definition clarity. Because you can imagine the failure so vividly, you assume it is highly likely to happen. But imagination is not probability. Vividness is not evidence. Just because you can picture a disaster perfectly does not mean it has any statistical likelihood of occurring in the real world. The fourth myth is the demand for total certainty. You believe that good decisions require a complete absence of doubt. Total certainty is incredibly rare, and waiting for it guarantees long-term stagnation. Good decisions do not require perfect clarity. They only require enough clarity to take the very next step. The anatomy of precision. To cut through the fog, you must learn to map your fear. When the panic sets in, you cannot let it remain a vague cloud of dread. You must force it onto paper or articulate it clearly in your mind. Ask yourself what exactly you are afraid will happen. Force your brain to be specific. Then demand to see the evidence that supports this specific fear. What proof do you have that this disaster is guaranteed? Next, force your mind to identify what is actually more likely to happen than your worst-case story. Finally, ask yourself what you would actually do if the difficulty occurred. You will almost always find that your recovery plan is highly actionable, which instantly shrinks the perceived threat. Once the fear is mapped, you must run it through a facts filter. Look at the situation and separate what you absolutely know to be true from what you are merely assuming. Then, separate your assumptions from what you are wildly exaggerating. Strip away the dramatic adjectives and the catastrophic predictions. Look at what remains true after the emotion settles. That small, boring pile of facts is the only thing you should be making your decision on. You must also apply a control lens to the situation. Separate what is entirely within your control from what is completely outside of it. Other people's opinions, the state of the economy, and the final outcome are outside your control. Your preparation, your effort, and your response are within your control. Put every ounce of your energy only into the controllable part. This immediately reduces your feeling of helplessness and dramatically increases your forward movement. The decision reset. When you are caught in a live moment of hesitation, you need a mental checkpoint system to reset your perspective. You can do this by asking yourself a sequence of 5 specific questions. First, ask what the real decision in front of you actually is, stripping away all the future implications. Second, ask what specific fear is currently trying to make this decision for you. Third, ask what objective facts actually support this fearful story. Fourth, ask what the stronger, more expansive version of yourself would do with these exact same facts. Fifth, ask what your next visible action needs to be. This process moves you rapidly from abstraction to action. You must replace the paralyzing question of whether you can do this with the practical question of what the next required move is. You must replace the terrifying question of what if you fail with the grounding question of what recovery would actually look like. You must replace the endless debate over whether you are ready with the concrete question of what preparation is sufficient for step 1. Shrinking the monster. There are several highly effective tricks to keep your mind grounded in reality. The first is to name the fear as plainly as possible. Fear loses a massive amount of power when it becomes concrete and boring. Plain language prevents dramatic distortion. Saying that you are afraid you will sound inexperienced during the meeting is a highly workable problem. Saying that everything is going to go badly and your career will be ruined is an unworkable catastrophe. Keep the language simple. You must also put strict time limits on your analysis. Reflection without boundaries inevitably becomes rumination. Rumination feels incredibly productive because your brain is working hard, but it actually drains your courage by keeping you entirely focused on the threat. Give yourself a defined decision window. Tell yourself you have 20 minutes to analyze the facts, and when the timer goes off, you must move. Start using probability language in your daily life. Ask yourself what is likely, not merely what is possible. Almost anything is possible. It is possible that you will forget every word of your presentation and be laughed out of the room. But the mind needs realistic weighting. What is the actual probability of that happening, given your preparation? Focus on the probable, not the possible. Finally, reduce the scale of your focus. Big, vague futures create massive panic. Looking 5 years down the road and trying to guarantee your success will paralyze you. Small, visible steps restore your perspective. The next move matters infinitely more than the whole imagined mountain. The clarity advantage. When you practice this level of discernment, the outcomes are immediate and powerful. You will start catching yourself in the exact moment you confuse a feeling with a fact. You will become highly skilled at naming your fears clearly, which means your everyday decisions will become significantly less emotionally messy. As you advance, you will evaluate risk much more realistically. You will waste far less time spinning in mental spirals, and you will begin making braver choices based on clean, undeniable logic. Ultimately, you will become capable of calm, firm decision-making under extreme uncertainty. You will stop giving vague fear automatic authority over your life. You will develop a reputation with yourself and with others for being clear, steady, and incredibly hard to rattle. However, there are pitfalls you must avoid. Do not use this logical framework to completely suppress your emotions. If you become cold or dismissive toward your own experience, the unprocessed fear will simply return in a stronger form later. Respect your emotion as valuable data, but do not crown it as absolute truth. Also, be careful not to swing from overthinking directly into reckless speed. Rejecting reflection entirely and mistaking impulsiveness for decisiveness will lead to unforced errors. Use structured thinking with clear limits, not zero thinking. Do not confuse a low probability with an impossibility. Dismissing real risks too quickly means you will fail to prepare where preparation would actually help. You must distinguish exaggerated fear from sensible caution. And most importantly, do not let this framework remain a theoretical insight. If you understand these concepts but fail to apply them in live moments of pressure, your old habits will instantly return. You now possess the tools to strip the disguise off your fear. You know how to slice through the emotional fog, reduce the perceived threat, and isolate the exact logical step you need to take. Your mind is clear, and the path forward is completely visible. But seeing the path is not the same thing as walking it. In fact, the moment you identify that clear, logical next step, a new and entirely different kind of resistance will rise up to stop you. You will feel an overwhelming, almost magnetic urge to wait for a magical surge of confidence before you actually move your feet. What you choose to do in that exact moment of hesitation holds the ultimate secret to generating courage out of thin air. Chapter 5. Action First. You are standing at the edge of a diving board, staring down at the water, waiting for the exact moment when you finally feel brave enough to jump. You have read all the books on diving, you have visualized the perfect form, and you have analyzed the temperature of the water. But your feet are still glued to the board. You are trapped in the most common, paralyzing illusion in personal development, the belief that you must feel stronger before you can act stronger. In this chapter, we are going to completely reverse that order. You are about to learn the exact mechanism that turns theory into transformation. We will slowly reveal why your endless preparation is actually a sophisticated form of hiding, and how you can use strategically imperfect movement to completely short-circuit your self-doubt. You are about to discover that the confidence you have been waiting for is not a prerequisite for the jump. It is the reward for hitting the water. The illusion of readiness. Action is the exact point where theory becomes transformation. You can understand your self-doubt perfectly, you can map your fears with incredible precision, and you can update your identity labels all day long. But if you do not physically move, you will still obey the fear. Insight may feel incredibly powerful, but action is what actually changes your identity. The turning point in your life will not come when your emotions finally cooperate. The turning point comes when your behavior changes before your emotions are fully on board. Waiting for confidence keeps you trapped in an endless, exhausting loop. You assume that confidence is the entry ticket to the arena. You believe that once you feel completely sure of yourself, the action will become easy. In reality, confidence is usually the receipt you get after you have already paid the price of doing something difficult. This mistaken order steals years from capable people. They wait for a feeling that can only be generated by the exact behavior they are avoiding. Action weakens self-doubt in a way that thought alone simply cannot. Action generates undeniable, real-world evidence. This evidence directly corrects your distorted self-perception, which is one of the main fuels of playing small. When you act despite your uncertainty, you prove to your nervous system that you can survive discomfort, think under pressure, and recover from awkwardness. This is why repeated action is infinitely more convincing than positive self-talk. Your brain trusts experience. Waiting creates fantasy. Action creates proof. This is why small action always beats grand intention. Most stalled people do not need bigger dreams or more elaborate vision boards. They need faster movement. The speed of your honest action matters far more than the size of your ideal plan. The antidote to paralysis. The core antidote to self-doubt is imperfect action. You are not being asked to feel brave first. You are being asked to act while still feeling entirely mixed, unsure, and uncomfortable. This is exactly where your power starts returning. Every completed move, no matter how small or messy, sends a clear message to your brain. I can handle more than I thought. Every honest attempt chips away at the old identity. Conversely, every avoided move leaves the old identity completely untouched and fully in charge. You must learn the difference between actual movement and motion theater. Real action changes your reality. It involves exposure, decision, or completion. Fake action creates the feeling of progress without any actual exposure. Reorganizing your desk, doing more research, or endlessly tweaking a proposal are forms of motion theater. They keep you busy, but they keep you safe. You must develop the discipline of starting before comfort arrives. Comfort is almost always delayed, and delay is incredibly expensive. Therefore, the strongest rule you can adopt is simple: move while you are still uncomfortable. Dismantling the waiting game. To adopt this rule, you must abandon the myths that keep you waiting. The first myth is the belief that you need more motivation before you can start. Motivation is wildly unstable. It is a terrible foundation for a bigger life. Action actually creates motivation after the movement begins. You must stop treating your mood as a permission slip. The second myth is the assumption that your first move has to be massive. Big first moves often create completely avoidable overwhelm. Small, visible first moves are far more repeatable. The point of your initial action is traction, not drama. You just need the wheels to grip the road. The third myth is the perfectionist trap. If I cannot do it well, I should wait. Waiting for excellence kills early learning. First attempts are supposed to be rough. They are supposed to be awkward. Progress belongs exclusively to people who are entirely willing to look unfinished in public. The fourth myth is the belief that planning is progress. Planning matters, but only to the exact degree that it leads quickly to execution. Endless preparation is often just fear wearing a professional suit. You must learn to recognize the exact moment when your planning has turned into hiding. The fifth myth is the idea that action only counts when it feels serious or monumental. Tiny moves still rewire your identity. A short phone call, one difficult email, one clear decision, or one honest sentence can completely change the trajectory of your day. Small action is never weak action when it successfully breaks your freeze. The engine of proof. To build this habit, you must use the action-first system. Step 1 is to shrink the move. Define one visible action that can be completed very soon. Make it specific enough that your mind cannot hide in vagueness. Do not say you're going to work on the project. Say you are going to draft the first page, send the proposal, or ask the specific question. Step 2 is to move before your mood votes. Do not hold a committee meeting with every anxious thought in your head. Start moving while your mind is still actively arguing with you. This is where courage becomes a physical reality. You do not wait for the debate to end. You simply walk out of the room and start working. Step 3 is to capture the proof. After you take the action, write down exactly what you did, what you survived, and what your mind predicted that did not actually happen. This closes the loop and forces your brain to register the victory. You must also adopt the first friction rule. Notice the exact moment you feel the urge to postpone a task. You know the feeling, the sudden desire to check your phone, get a snack, or answer an unimportant email. Treat that exact moment of friction as the signal to begin, not the signal to retreat. When you feel the urge to pull away, lean in immediately. This completely reverses your old pattern. Use a built-in exercise called the proof sprint. Choose one specific task you have been actively avoiding. Reduce it to a 10 to 20-minute opening move. Complete that move in one single sitting. Afterward, write down 3 things: what you predicted would happen, what actually happened, and what this proves about your ability to act under discomfort. You must categorize your actions to ensure you are not engaging in motion theater. Exposure actions involve speaking, publishing, or asking. Decision actions involve choosing, committing, and stopping the endless revisiting of options. Completion actions involve finishing, delivering, and closing the loop. If your action does not fall into one of these categories, you are likely just staying busy to avoid being brave. Lowering the drawbridge. To make this system work, you must lower the threshold for starting. Starting is almost always the hardest part because the resistance is highest right before the movement begins. Lower the barrier to entry without lowering your ultimate standard. Give yourself permission to write a terrible first draft, to stumble through the opening of the meeting, or to send a less than perfect email. Get moving first, then improve later. Count your action, not your emotion. Feeling brave is entirely optional. Acting bravely is the real target. A shaky, terrified move still counts as a massive victory. Use time boxing to reduce vague resistance. Give yourself a defined action window, like 20 minutes, and commit to working only for that time. Finite effort feels infinitely more doable than endless effort. In live moments of hesitation, ask better questions. Do not ask yourself if you feel ready. Ask yourself what the next move is that earns proof. Ask yourself what your future self would thank you for doing right now. Look at real examples of action under doubt. J.K. Rowling faced massive rejection before her success, yet she kept submitting her work despite the undeniable sting of failure. Sarah Blakely started Spanx without any traditional business credentials, learning entirely by moving forward rather than waiting for formal permission. The lesson here is not celebrity worship. The lesson is that undeniable proof is built by acting long before status or certainty arrives. The momentum shift. When you implement this system, the outcomes are incredibly liberating. You will begin starting your tasks much sooner. Avoided tasks will rapidly lose their heavy emotional weight. You will see firsthand that action is entirely survivable, even when it is messy and imperfect. As you practice, you will initiate more often at work and in your personal life. You will make decisions without the exhausting internal debate. You will build a mountain of visible evidence that you can act under intense pressure. Ultimately, you will reach a point where you no longer require confidence to begin anything. You will become someone who turns discomfort into forward movement almost automatically. Self-doubt will lose its major authority over your life simply because action has become your default answer. However, there are traps you must navigate carefully. If you pick first moves that are too large, you will overwhelm yourself. One failed attempt at a massive goal will become false proof that the action-first method does not work. You fix this by shrinking the first move until it is hard but entirely realistic. If you confuse frantic activity with meaningful action, you will stay exhausted but completely stuck. You will complete safe tasks instead of courageous tasks. You fix this by strictly defining whether your action creates exposure, decision, or completion. If you expect action to feel good immediately, you will mistake ongoing discomfort for failure. You will assume the method is not working because your heart is still racing. You fix this by judging your action strictly by the proof created, not by your emotional comfort. If you take one brave step and then stop, you're expecting one moment to solve a pattern built over years. You underestimate the power of repetition. You fix this by treating the first win as the opening move, not the finish line. And if you use action to outrun reflection completely, you may become reckless and skip useful learning. You fix this by keeping a brief period of reflection after your action, ensuring your courage stays intelligent. You now know how to generate courage on demand by moving before you are ready. You have the tools to break the freeze and take the first step. But taking the first step is not the same as finishing the journey. The moment you pause, the old resistance will try to flood back in, attempting to turn a temporary break into a permanent stall. To prevent this, you must learn how to string these imperfect actions together so tightly that fear never has the time to rebuild its case against you. Chapter 6. Momentum Loop. You have just done the hardest part. You took the leap, you made the first imperfect move, and you survived the initial wave of discomfort. But then, something insidious happens. You sit back to admire your work, you take a well-deserved breath, and you tell yourself you will pick the project back up tomorrow. Tomorrow turns into the weekend. The weekend turns into next month. The gap between your first move and your second move stretches so wide that your old fears rush right back in to fill the empty space. You are about to learn why the pause is the most dangerous place in your entire psychological landscape. We are going to uncover a specific behavioral engine that prevents self-doubt from ever having the idle time it needs to rebuild its courtroom case against you. This is not about frantic, chaotic speed. It is about a controlled, structural continuity that keeps you moving long enough for your confidence to finally catch up with your actions. The danger of the empty space. Delay is one of the absolute favorite weapons of your self-doubt. When you postpone an action, you are not just pausing time. You are actively giving your mind the empty space it needs to dramatize the situation. The longer a task sits untouched on your desk or in your mind, the more impressive, dramatic, and dangerous it begins to feel. Delay takes a simple, real-world task and inflates it into a massive, insurmountable obstacle. It turns your physical action back into abstract theory, and self-doubt always wins in the realm of theory. Momentum does the exact opposite. It violently reduces your emotional friction. Once your movement begins, the second step is almost always easier than the first. Repeated motion lowers your internal resistance because your nervous system rapidly learns that the movement is survivable. You stop bracing for impact and start leaning into the work. More importantly, momentum fiercely protects your new identity. A moving person naturally starts to see themselves differently. A stalled person immediately starts to build a self-story around their hesitation. This makes momentum a profound psychological tool, not just a shallow productivity hack. When you allow slow starts and long pauses to dominate your days, you create incredibly expensive internal costs. Unfinished plans drain your baseline energy. Mental loops about what you should be doing steal your attention from what you are actually doing. This inaction creates a heavy, invisible fatigue that makes the next attempt feel twice as difficult. You are exhausted not from working, but from the mental weight of avoiding the work. The architecture of continuity. To defeat this invisible fatigue, you must focus entirely on shortening your hesitation. The goal of a bigger life is not to never hesitate again. That is an impossible standard. The actual goal is to recover from your hesitation with lightning speed. You must learn how to re-enter your movement so fast that the fear does not even have time to register the pause. You achieve this by making your very next step hyper-visible. When you look at the whole mountain of your ambition, it is deeply overwhelming. But you do not climb a mountain by staring at the peak. You climb it by locating the next usable foothold. Clarity does not live in the grand vision. Clarity lives exclusively at the level of the next physical move. This requires you to completely replace your all-or-nothing patterns. Many people think in extreme binaries. They believe they must have perfect, unstoppable momentum, or they must collapse into total avoidance. This chapter teaches you to value steady, recoverable motion instead. You must create systems that support your action when your motivation vanishes. Structure lowers your friction. Repetition lowers your decision fatigue. Simplicity protects your consistency. When the system is simple, motion becomes your default state. Dismantling the perfectionist delay. Before you can build this engine, you must shatter the myths that keep you waiting on the sidelines. The first myth is the belief that you need the full, comprehensive plan before you can take the next step. This is often just your fear asking for an impossible level of certainty. Most real progress is discovered while you are moving, not while you are staring at a whiteboard. Full clarity usually arrives late in the process, as a reward for your action. The second myth is the illusion that waiting just a little longer will make you feel more ready. Sometimes a brief pause does offer perspective, but far more often, it only gives your fear more time to grow roots. Readiness is built much faster through physical contact with the task than through endless delay. The third myth is the toxic mindset that if your momentum breaks, your entire streak is ruined and you have failed. This all-or-nothing thinking makes one bad day far too costly. High performers do not possess perfect streaks. They simply recover faster instead of mourning their missteps longer. Re-entry is infinitely more valuable than perfection. The fourth myth is the dangerous assumption that being busy means you are being productive. Busyness is often a brilliant disguise for avoidance. You can spend 10 hours organizing your files to avoid making one intimidating phone call. Motion matters only when it points directly toward what actually matters. You must learn to ruthlessly distinguish mere activity from genuine momentum. The engine of unstoppable progress. To keep your movement alive, you must implement the momentum loop framework. This is a continuous, four-part cycle. First, you define the next visible step. You make it observable, finite, and highly relevant to your actual goal. Second, you complete that step quickly. You close the loop while your internal resistance is still forming, drastically reducing the room for mental negotiation and building immediate proof of motion. Third, you capture the progress. You mentally or physically note what moved forward, what became clearer, and what your mind had previously exaggerated. Fourth, and most importantly, you define the next visible step again before the current step fully cools. Momentum feeds on continuity. If you end a work session without defining exactly what you will do next, you are guaranteeing massive re-entry resistance tomorrow. You must also adopt the 24-hour rule. For anything truly important, you must take one concrete step within 24 hours of deciding to do it. This prevents mental inflation. It teaches your mind that your meaningful intentions always lead to visible behavior, rather than just fading into wishes. When you inevitably stall, you must use a restart ladder to climb back out of the freeze. Write down 3 specific restart actions for your most important projects. Level 1 is tiny. It involves opening the document, sending one single line, or reviewing one page. Level 2 is moderate. It requires you to work for 15 minutes, make one firm decision, or complete one small section. Level 3 is full re-entry, where you resume the main task block and recommit to the deadline. When you are paralyzed, you do not demand Level 3 from yourself. You simply execute Level 1 and let the physics of momentum carry you up the ladder. To protect this system, you must use incredibly tight planning horizons. Plan the next step, not the next month, in exhaustive detail. Long, elaborate plans quickly become hiding places. Short, immediate plans are highly compatible with aggressive action. The art of frictionless return. There are several vital tricks to mastering this continuity. The most important rule of recovery is to restart smaller, not later. After a major interruption or a bad day, do not push the work to next week. Shrink the step until it is ridiculously easy, and do it today. This preserves your continuity. A late, tiny recovery is always better than a dramatic, guilt-ridden pause. You should also start using done lists instead of just to-do lists. Many people only track what is unfinished, staring at a mountain of uncompleted tasks every single day. This destroys your morale and completely distorts your reality. A done list keeps your proof visible. It reminds your nervous system that you are a person who executes. You must aggressively reduce your open loops. Carrying too many unfinished tasks dilutes your energy. Unclosed loops keep calling for your attention in the background of your mind, creating a low-grade anxiety that drains your courage. Finish more small things completely to free up more power for the big things. Protect your transitions. Many people lose their momentum between phases of their day, not during the effort itself. End each work period by defining the exact next step for tomorrow. This makes your re-entry smooth and thoughtless. Look at real examples of how professionals prioritize momentum over mood. Stephen King built his massive output partly through a relentless, steady routine, not by waiting for magical inspiration to strike. Serena Williams became dominant through repeated, highly disciplined repetitions on the court, not by relying on occasional emotional peaks. The lesson from those who operate at the highest levels is always repetition, not glamour. The inevitable traps of speed. When you master the momentum loop, the outcomes will reshape your daily reality. You will hesitate significantly less before starting difficult tasks. Small delays will stop turning into all-day delays. The projects that used to intimidate you will feel manageable because you only ever focus on the next foothold. You will become incredibly fast at re-entering your work after a disruption. You will become highly productive without ever becoming frantic, and you will feel vastly less mentally exhausted by unfinished intentions. Ultimately, you will develop a stable, unshakable identity as someone who moves. Fear will have zero idle time to gather power against you, and momentum will become one of your strongest competitive advantages. But this upward spiral has traps you must avoid. The first problem occurs when you mistake speed for wisdom. If you move fast in the wrong direction, you are just accelerating your own failure. You might skip useful thinking in the name of action. You fix this by ensuring your momentum is always tied tightly to your core priorities and values. The second problem is becoming rigid and punishing. You might turn your momentum into a weapon for self-attack, collapsing into despair after one imperfect day. You fix this by defining your consistency as your ability to regularly return to the work, not as a demand for perfect, unbroken streaks. The third problem is carrying too many projects at once. Your energy will become fragmented, and your momentum will weaken across all fronts. You fix this by ruthlessly narrowing your active commitments and closing loops deliberately. The fourth problem is trying to restart emotionally instead of structurally. You might wait to feel back in the groove before you resume your work. This guarantees that your recovery will take 10 times longer than necessary. You fix this by using your restart ladder and acting first, letting the feeling follow the structure. The fifth problem is confusing a temporary pause with a permanent failure. When you stall, shame extends the pause. The story of your failure becomes bigger than the actual interruption. You fix this by treating your recovery speed as a core trainable skill, completely separate from your self-worth. You now know how to keep the engine running. You know how to close the gaps, shorten the hesitation, and protect your forward motion. You are moving, and you are moving consistently. But as you string these actions together, you will eventually hit a wall that momentum alone cannot break. You will look inward and realize that despite your recent progress, a deep, quiet part of you still expects you to quit. You are moving forward, but you are carrying the heavy ghost of every promise you have ever broken to yourself. To sustain this bigger life, you must repair the deepest fracture in your psychological foundation. Self-trust. Imagine you have a friend who constantly makes grand plans with you. They promise to help you move, they swear they will call you back, and they guarantee they will show up to your events. But every single time, at the very last minute, they cancel. After a year of this, how much weight do their promises carry? The answer is zero. You stop believing them, not because they are inherently evil, but because their track record is completely broken. Now, turn that exact scenario inward. You have likely spent years making private promises to yourself and breaking them the moment things get difficult. You are not weak, and you are not incapable. You are simply unconvinced by your own word. In this chapter, we are going to repair the deepest fracture in your psychological foundation. You are about to learn how to rebuild your internal credibility, transforming your fragile, mood-dependent confidence into an unbreakable certainty that you will actually do what you say you will do. The hidden cost of broken promises. Self-doubt often survives completely undetected because your self-trust is fundamentally weak. You may desperately want growth, you may have the skills, and you may even understand how to move past your fear. But if you do not fully trust your own follow-through, every step forward feels incredibly unstable. Growth feels infinitely riskier when the self feels unreliable. If you know deep down that you are likely to quit the moment the pressure rises, your mind will naturally try to stop you from starting in the first place. Building internal credibility violently reduces your mental noise. When you actually trust yourself, fewer decisions become dramatic events. You do not have to spend 3 days debating whether you will stick to a new habit because you already know you will. Fewer promises need internal debate, which means a massive amount of energy is suddenly freed up and redirected into pure execution. Self-trust is the vital bridge between temporary courage and permanent consistency. One act of courage is just a spark. It is exciting, but it burns out quickly. Self-trust is the engine that keeps the fire going. Without it, your progress remains incredibly fragile, completely dependent on how motivated you happen to feel on any given Tuesday. The damage caused by broken self-promises goes far beyond missed output. The deeper, more insidious damage is identity erosion. Every time you repeatedly avoid a task, quit early, or betray your own standards, you teach yourself that your intentions do not matter. You start doubting your own word. You become a stranger to yourself, unable to predict whether you will show up or surrender. This chapter is about stopping that erosion and becoming reliable in your own eyes again. The architecture of reliability. Trusting yourself is not achieved through grand declarations or temporary bursts of intense motivation. It is achieved through repeated, boring reliability. You must understand that self-trust is simply accumulated evidence. Every time you keep a realistic promise, you deposit a coin into your internal bank account. Every time you break one, you make a massive withdrawal. Many readers carry a heavy history of false starts and broken commitments. Because of this, they often believe they need to completely wipe the slate clean and start fresh with a massive, life-altering transformation. This chapter addresses repair, not shame. Repair matters because you do not need to start fresh. You simply need to rebuild steadily. The secret to this steady rebuild is making your promises the exact right size. Oversized promises destroy trust because they are designed for a fantasy version of yourself who never gets tired, never gets scared, and never has a bad day. Realistic promises build trust because they are designed for the actual human being you are right now. You must learn the art of scaling your commitments. You must also create structures that support your brave behavior. Habits drastically reduce your reliance on your fluctuating mood. Visible tracking protects your honesty, ensuring you cannot lie to yourself about your consistency. Simplicity supports long-term follow-through. When the system is simple, reliability becomes your default setting. Dismantling the motivation trap. To build this reliability, you must abandon the myths that keep you trapped in a cycle of self-betrayal. The first myth is the belief that you need to feel disciplined before you can act disciplined. Discipline is almost always the result of repeated follow-through, not the emotional starting condition. Mood follows structure far more often than people realize. If you wait to feel disciplined, you will wait forever. The second myth is the dangerous idea that a huge, dramatic promise will finally force you to change. Huge promises often create a fragile sense of hope, and fragile hope breaks incredibly quickly under the weight of reality. Trust is built far more effectively by moderate promises kept than by dramatic promises broken. The third myth is the perfectionist trap, the belief that missing once means you have completely failed. This toxic mindset turns normal human inconsistency into a total identity collapse. It makes recovery 10 times harder because you are drowning in shame. The truth is much simpler and much more forgiving. Missing once matters infinitely less than how fast you repair the break. The fourth myth is the illusion that positive thinking alone will make you trust yourself. Thinking positively certainly helps your mood, but trust depends entirely on the memory of your behavior. The self believes what the self repeatedly sees. You cannot affirm your way out of a broken track record. You have to act your way out of it. The blueprint for internal credibility. To rebuild your track record, you must use the promise ladder. This is a system of scaling your commitments to guarantee your success. You start at the bottom with a tiny promise. This is a commitment so small that it is almost embarrassing, but it is easy enough to keep consistently, regardless of your mood. This builds your baseline credibility. Examples include 10 focused minutes of work, sending one difficult email, or doing one honest check-in with yourself. Once the tiny promises are stable, you move up to a standard promise. This is meaningful but still highly realistic. It builds deep internal respect. Examples include 3 solid work sessions per week, having one necessary boundary conversation, or publishing one piece of work. Only after your standard promises are completely stable do you move to a stretch promise. This is challenging, but not reckless. Examples include leading the major meeting, launching the massive project, or having the incredibly hard high-stakes conversation. You never start at the stretch promise. you earn the right to make it by mastering the levels below it. You must track these promises visibly. Hidden promises are incredibly easy to break because no one, not even you, is holding you accountable. Visible tracking creates brutal honesty, and honesty is the exact soil in which self-trust grows. When you inevitably miss a promise, you must use the repair protocol. Do not spiral into shame. Name exactly what happened without adding dramatic adjectives. Shrink the next promise if necessary to ensure you can hit it and then restart immediately. To begin this process today, conduct a credibility audit. List 3 promises you regularly make to yourself and regularly break. Identify exactly why they fail. Are they too vague? Are they too ambitious? Are they entirely dependent on you being in a perfect mood? Rewrite each of those promises into a realistic, measurable, repeatable version. Track them for one single week to start rebuilding your trust. Finally, you must protect your non-negotiables. Not everything in your life can matter equally. If you try to keep 50 promises a day, you will fail at all of them. Choose a few core commitments that fiercely protect your identity and let the rest go. This keeps your self-trust from becoming diluted. The mechanics of private proof. There are several vital tricks to mastering this internal contract. The first is to make your promises significantly smaller than your ego wants them to be. Your ego loves the idea of a dramatic, overnight transformation. Your trust loves steady, undeniable proof. Choose the commitment that your future self, on their absolute worst day, can actually honor. Use your recovery speed as your primary metric for success. The strongest people in the world are not perfect. They simply return to their baseline faster than anyone else. This is a highly trainable advantage. When you fall off the wagon, measure your success by how quickly you get back on, not by the fact that you fell. Keep your score entirely in private. Self-trust is not performance theater. It is an internal contract between you and yourself. Track your wins for truth, not for applause. The promises you keep when absolutely no one is watching are the ones that build the deepest level of internal credibility. Protect the chain of your small wins. A long chain of modest, undeniable proof changes your identity far faster than rare heroic effort. Repeated wins calm your nervous system and create a profound sense of strong self-respect. Look at real examples of how self-trust is built through repetition. Kobe Bryant became legendary not just because of his talent, but through his relentless, almost psychotic follow-through on his private practice standards. Oprah Winfrey built her massive authority not through one lucky moment, but through decades of sustained, reliable consistency. The lesson from the greats is always credibility through repetition. The power of a kept word. When you implement this system, the outcomes will fundamentally alter how you move through the world. You will immediately stop making reckless, oversized promises to yourself. You will begin completing significantly more of what you start. Your internal stress will decrease dramatically simply because your daily self-betrayal has decreased. As you advance, you will begin trusting your own decisions and commitments implicitly. You will become incredibly steady in your work, your relationships, and your personal goals. Your confidence will become entirely detached from your fluctuating mood, resting instead on the solid bedrock of your proven track record. Ultimately, you will develop a deeply grounded sense of self-respect. You will stop needing constant external reassurance because your own history reassures you. Self-trust will become the durable, unbreakable base for your bigger life. However, there are traps that can destroy this progress if you are not careful. If you set promises that are too ambitious, you will confuse intensity with seriousness, and failure will become highly likely. You fix this by scaling down until consistency becomes effortless. If you use your missed promises as proof of your inadequacy, shame will become your main response, and shame instantly kills your ability to repair. You fix this by using the repair protocol immediately and judging your overall pattern, not your single misses. If you build rigid systems that do not fit your real life, they will collapse under pressure, and you will mistake that collapse for personal weakness. You fix this by building flexible structures with clear, achievable minimums. If you seek trust through external validation, you will find that praise feels good but never actually replaces your self-credibility. Your system will remain emotionally dependent on others. You fix this by tracking your private proof and keeping promises that no one else ever sees. And if you become obsessed with perfect consistency, you will turn self-trust into a toxic form of perfectionism, where a single break feels too costly to survive. You fix this by defining your trust as your honest return to the work, not your flawless performance of it. You have now built an internal foundation of iron. You know how to decode your fear, update your identity, cut through the fog, take action, sustain momentum, and trust your own word. You are incredibly strong in private, but a bigger life cannot be lived entirely in the shadows. Eventually, you have to step out of the safety of your own mind and into the harsh, unpredictable light of other people's opinions. And when you do, you will face a fear that is entirely different from anything we have discussed so far. Chapter 8, Seen Anyway. You have likely spent years perfecting a very specific magic trick. You work incredibly hard in private, building your skills, refining your ideas, and preparing for the exact moment when you will finally step into the spotlight. But right before the curtain rises, you perform your ultimate trick. You completely disappear. You stay quiet in the meeting, you leave your work sitting in a hidden folder, and you let someone else take the credit. In this chapter, we are going to expose the hidden mechanics behind this disappearing act. You are about to discover why your desperate need to look flawless is actually the exact thing keeping you invisible. We will slowly reveal how to dismantle the paralyzing forces of perfectionism and comparison, and how to build a tolerance for being seen that is so strong you will never need to hide again. You are about to learn that the price of a bigger life is not perfection. The price is honest, uncomfortable exposure. The tragedy of the private giant. A person can build immense private strength and still completely disappear in public. This creates a deeply painful split between your inner ability and your outer behavior. You know exactly what you are capable of, and you know you have more to offer than you are currently showing. But the fear of visibility keeps you trapped in a cage of your own making. You avoid sharing your work, you avoid asking for opportunities, and you actively avoid taking up space in rooms where your voice desperately matters. This happens because playing small is not just a private struggle, it is a highly social one. The moment you step into the light, you are exposed to judgment, criticism, and comparison. To protect yourself from this exposure, you adopt a strategy that looks incredibly noble, but is actually deeply destructive: perfectionism. Perfectionism hides in highly respectable language. You tell yourself you are just refining it, or that you are not quite ready yet, or that you want it to be incredibly strong before you share it. But often, the real issue is not the quality of the work. The real issue is your profound fear of being judged while you are still in progress. Visibility is a non-negotiable part of expansion. A bigger life usually means more eyes, higher stakes, and significantly more exposure. You cannot fully stop playing small while still hiding by default. Your strength must be practiced in public, not just imagined in private. If you wait until you feel completely immune to judgment before you step out, you will wait until you die. The illusion of the flawless debut. To survive this exposure, you must learn to be visible before you feel polished. This chapter teaches you to completely detach your personal worth from a flawless presentation. First versions matter immensely because they create actual contact with reality. Real growth requires public imperfection at some stage. You cannot skip the awkward phase of development. You must also understand perfectionism accurately. Sometimes perfectionism is genuine care for the craft, but far more often it is simply fear of exposure wearing a tuxedo. You must learn to tell the difference. If your standard produces action, it is care. If your standard produces endless delay, it is fear. Comparison makes this delay infinitely worse. Comparison completely distorts your progress by turning other people's polished middle chapters into proof of your own inadequacy. You look at someone who has been practicing in public for 10 years, compare their output to your rough first draft, and conclude that you are a failure. This chapter teaches you to escape this trap by comparing backward, not sideways. Building tolerance for judgment and awkwardness is your ultimate goal. Judgment cannot be eliminated. No matter how perfect you try to be, someone will misunderstand you, criticize you, or reject you. But while judgment cannot be eliminated, its power over your behavior can be drastically reduced. Tolerance grows through gradual exposure and relentless repetition. Shattering the mirrors of comparison. Before you can build this tolerance, you must shatter the myths that keep you hiding. The first myth is the belief that you should wait until you are fully polished before you allow yourself to be seen. Full polish is a moving target. The moment you reach your current standard, your taste will evolve, and you will feel unpolished all over again. Waiting for it delays your growth indefinitely. Improvement often requires being seen before perfection even exists. The second myth is the lie that comparison will motivate you. Sometimes, looking at a competitor sparks a brief burst of effort, but far more often, it creates deep discouragement or cheap imitation. It weakens your honest self-development because you stop trying to find your own voice and start trying to mimic theirs. The third myth is the assumption that if people judge you, it means you should stop. Judgment is not a clean measure of your value. Visible people are judged more, not less. Growth requires a thicker filter, not total, universal approval. The fourth myth is the belief that perfectionism proves you have high standards. High standards can be incredibly healthy, but chronic delay in the name of standards is almost always fear. The real question you must ask yourself is whether your standard is actually producing forward action or if it is just providing a respectable excuse for your avoidance. The architecture of exposure. To build your tolerance for being seen, you must use the visibility ladder. Choose one specific area of your life where you have been hiding. List 5 levels of exposure in that area, ranging from very safe to highly intimidating. Level 1 might be sharing an idea privately with a close friend. Level 2 might be sharing a rough version of your work with a trusted colleague. Level 3 might be sharing it publicly in a limited, low-stakes way. Level 4 might be speaking up in a higher-stakes setting. Level 5 might be owning a highly visible role consistently. Do not start at level 5. Start exactly one rung below your panic point. Repeat that specific rung until it feels significantly less emotionally expensive. Once the panic subsides and the action feels manageable, move up to the next rung. This gradual exposure teaches your nervous system that visibility is not fatal. You must also adopt the version 1 rule. Your first visible attempt is completely allowed to be incomplete. The goal of version 1 is contact with reality, not perfection. Exposure teaches you infinitely faster than private polishing ever could. To defeat comparison, use the backward comparison method. Stop looking sideways at your peers or your idols. Compare your current behavior exclusively to your own past behavior. Ask yourself what has improved in your courage, your clarity, and your consistency over the last 6 months. This creates healthier, sustainable momentum. Use a built-in exercise called the exposure debrief. After you take a visible action, do not just move on. Sit down and write 3 things. First, write exactly what you feared would happen before you took the action. Second, write exactly what actually happened. Third, write what you can now tolerate better than you could yesterday. This simple practice trains your mind to update its reality instead of endlessly recycling its old fears. Finally, you must learn to filter feedback intelligently. Not all opinions deserve equal weight in your mind. Separate the useful signal from the useless noise. Protect your growing confidence from random, unqualified voices. Navigating the spotlight. There are several vital tricks to surviving the spotlight. The first is to aggressively lower the standard for your first exposure. Strong enough always beats perfect. Done today always beats ideal someday. Understand that version 1 is simply a bridge to version 2. It is not a final verdict on your talent. You must fully expect awkwardness. Early visibility almost always feels strange. You will stumble over your words, you will format things incorrectly, and you will feel exposed. Strange does not mean wrong. it simply means new. Protect your attention fiercely from comparison triggers. Too much exposure to other people's highly polished performances can severely distort your self-perception. If scrolling through social media or looking at a competitor's work makes you want to hide, distance yourself immediately. Return to your own lane and focus entirely on your own standards. Look at real examples of people who were willing to be seen before they were perfect. Brené Brown built massive global impact by speaking openly about vulnerability and imperfection, not by pretending to be completely beyond it. Ed Sheeran has openly shared recordings of his early, terrible singing, describing his relentless, awkward performing as the exact mechanism of his growth. The lesson is clear. Public strength is almost always built through highly imperfect, visible repetitions. You must also build a recovery script for criticism. When the judgment inevitably comes, ask yourself 3 questions. What part of this feedback is actually useful? What part is just noise or projection? And what specific action will I take now to move forward? The freedom of being seen. When you practice these strategies, the outcomes are incredibly liberating. You will begin sharing your ideas and your work much more often. The paralyzing fear of judgment will lose a massive amount of its emotional charge. Comparison will completely stop dictating your daily confidence. As you advance, you will speak much more openly in important rooms. You will publish, ask, present, lead, and contribute with a new level of visible authority. You will tolerate imperfect exposure without collapsing into a spiral of self-criticism. Ultimately, you will become someone who can be fully seen and still stay completely steady. Visibility will stop feeling like a lethal threat and will start feeling like a normal, healthy expression of your capacity. Playing big in public will become a core part of your identity. However, there are traps you must avoid. If you expose too much too fast, you will overwhelm your nervous system, and one harsh experience will become exaggerated proof that you should have stayed hidden. You fix this by strictly using the gradual exposure of the visibility ladder. If you become approval dependent, praise will become your new drug, and your confidence will rise and fall entirely based on audience reaction. You fix this by anchoring your visibility to your own values and self-respect, not to external applause. If you use the concept of authenticity to justify under-preparation, you are making a massive mistake. Visibility is never an excuse for sloppiness. Honest exposure still deserves your real effort. You fix this by preparing enough to respect the work, and then releasing it before perfectionism takes over. If you keep comparing yourself at the worst possible moments, your courage will drain instantly. You fix this by returning immediately to backward comparison and focusing entirely on your concrete next steps. And if you mistake discomfort for actual damage, you will retreat at the first sign of friction. Not every uncomfortable visible moment is harmful. Many are simply the feeling of growing in public. You fix this by debriefing your exposure and separating temporary embarrassment from real harm. You have now dismantled the final barrier. You know how to step into the light, tolerate the judgment, and stand firmly in your own capacity. You have all the pieces of the puzzle. But having the pieces is not the same as seeing the whole picture. To make this transformation permanent, you must learn how to weave these individual strategies into a single, unbreakable way of living. Chapter 9, Bigger Life. You have spent the last 8 chapters dismantling the invisible cage you built around your own potential. You have examined the locks, you have removed the hinges, and you now hold the key firmly in your own hand. But knowing exactly how the door opens is not the same thing as walking through it and deciding to live permanently on the outside. Up until this exact moment, you have been acquiring insight. You have been gathering the psychological tools required to understand your own hesitation. But insight without integration is just a highly sophisticated form of entertainment. In this final chapter, we are going to transform everything you have learned from a reading experience into a permanent operating system. We are going to slowly reveal the ultimate mechanism that makes playing big feel completely natural. and we will show you exactly how to ensure that your old fears never regain control of your behavior. You are about to discover that the ultimate victory is not feeling inspired for a few days. The ultimate victory is functioning as a completely different human being. The architecture of your new normal. To understand how your new operating system functions, you must look at the machinery you have just rebuilt. You now know that playing small is a behavioral pattern, not a permanent identity. It is made of repeated shrinking behaviors, driven entirely by self-doubt rather than a lack of ability, which means it can be completely dismantled through deliberate repetition. You understand that self-doubt is often a biological stress response to expansion. It appears around visibility, uncertainty, and growth. It signals unfamiliarity rather than incapacity, and it loses its paralyzing power the moment you interpret it correctly. You have learned that your identity must be aggressively updated through hard evidence. Old self-labels keep your behavior small, and a new identity requires undeniable proof, which can only be built through physical action. You know that fear must be tested against cold facts. Vague fear expands to fill your mind, but specific fear can be evaluated, managed, and defeated. Clarity destroys emotional distortion. You have discovered that action builds confidence, while waiting only delays your growth. Imperfect action creates the exact evidence your brain needs to generate believable, durable confidence. You also know that momentum protects your courage. Delay feeds your fear, but quick re-entry protects your progress and keeps your identity expanding. You understand that self-trust stabilizes your entire internal system. Kept promises build credibility, credibility reduces self-doubt, and reliability creates a deeply grounded confidence. Finally, you have realized that visibility is a non-negotiable part of growth. Perfectionism often hides your fear, and comparison distorts your progress, but being seen while you are still imperfect is the absolute requirement for a bigger life. When you integrate these truths, they empower you in ways you previously thought were impossible. You develop a completely new relationship to discomfort. Discomfort no longer automatically means danger, it means expansion. This single shift changes your decision-making powerfully and permanently. Your personal agency is fully restored. You no longer have to wait for emotional permission from your nervous system before you take a risk. Action becomes available to you much sooner, and growth becomes a mechanical process rather than a mysterious blessing. You create a profound internal steadiness characterized by less confusion, less hesitation, and massive amounts of self-respect. Confidence is no longer a matter of luck or personality. It is a buildable system of repeated proof. The ripple effect of taking up space. As you integrate this system, the impact will immediately bleed into your relationships and your environment. When you stop playing small, your communication becomes radically clear. You engage in less hiding, less passive silence, and far more honest expression. You stop expecting people to read your mind and start stating your needs with calm authority. Because your self-trust is now strong, your boundaries become impenetrable. Playing small always creates weak boundaries, and weak boundaries always invite resentment. But when you trust yourself to handle conflict, you no longer have to tolerate disrespect just to keep the peace. Your physical and energetic presence will also change dramatically. People can always feel when someone in the room is shrinking. They can sense the hesitation, the apologies, and the desperate need for approval. But they can also feel when someone stands firmly in their own weight. As you practice these principles, you will become more grounded and infinitely more trustworthy in the eyes of others. People follow individuals who trust themselves. Most importantly, your contribution to the world will expand. Hidden talent helps absolutely no one. Your brilliant ideas, your unique skills, and your deep empathy are completely useless if you keep them locked inside a vault of self-doubt. A bigger version of you gives more to your work, your family, your friendships, and your community. Playing big is never a selfish act when it serves truth and contribution. It is the highest form of generosity. Because of this shift, you will be able to achieve things that were previously blocked by your own mind. You will make decisions faster without demanding perfect certainty, leading to less paralysis, more movement, and a vastly better use of the opportunities that come your way. You will speak and act in the exact situations where you used to shrink. You will ask for what you need, set the boundary, start the project, and take the role. You will recover more quickly from fear, mistakes, and awkwardness, spending less time spiraling in self-attack and more time returning to action. You will trust yourself deeply because you now have a framework, you have proof, and you operate under an entirely different standard. The physics of compounding courage. The most beautiful part of this entire process is that it gets easier. Continuing to practice the concepts in this book will allow you to improve your results with less and less emotional effort over time. Repetition lowers the emotional cost of bravery. What feels incredibly hard and terrifying today will become an ordinary, mundane task next year. Exposure reduces the shock to your nervous system, and practice reduces the internal friction. You are not signing up for a lifetime of exhausting internal battles. You are putting in the heavy effort now so that the larger life becomes your default setting. Eventually, your identity will fully catch up to your behavior. At first, you will have to act bigger than you feel. You will have to push through the awkwardness and the imposter syndrome. But later, you will feel completely aligned with how you act. The new, expansive self becomes automatic. You will no longer have to coach yourself through every single email or every single meeting. You will simply show up and execute. Your systems will drastically reduce your willpower demands. Clear steps reduce your internal debate. Habits reduce your decision fatigue. Trust reduces your inner resistance. You will stop burning all your energy just trying to convince yourself to start, which means all that energy can finally be poured into the actual quality of your work. Your results will begin to compound rapidly. More action creates more proof. More proof creates more confidence. More confidence supports even bigger action. This is the upward spiral you are now fully equipped to build. Growth compounds not only through your external achievements, but through the internal normalization of your own power. You change permanently because the bigger pattern simply becomes who you are. The 24-hour window. To trigger this upward spiral, you cannot wait until tomorrow. Insight has a terrifyingly short half-life. If you close this book and simply reflect on how nice these ideas sound, your old identity will reclaim its territory by tomorrow morning. You must anchor your new operating system in physical reality immediately. Choose one specific area of your life where you have been playing small. It might be your career, your relationships, your creative work, your leadership, or your personal standards. Pick the area that causes you the most quiet frustration. Name the pattern clearly. Where exactly are you shrinking? Where are you delaying? Where are you hiding behind perfectionism or waiting for permission? Once you have identified the area and the pattern, define one next visible action. Make it highly concrete. Make it near-term. Make it brutally honest. Do not choose a vague goal like being more confident at work. Choose a specific action like sending the project proposal to your boss, publishing the article you have been hiding, or scheduling the hard conversation with your partner. You must execute this action within 24 hours, not someday, not when you feel better, not when the timing is perfect. You must do it now, while the material is fresh in your mind and your standard is raised. After you take the action, record the proof. Write down exactly what you did, what you survived, and what this specific action says about the person you are actively becoming. The final contract with yourself. You do not need a different personality to live the life you want. You do not need to be louder, more extroverted, or fundamentally different from who you are at your core. You simply need a different behavioral pattern. You need a stronger standard for what you will tolerate from your own mind, and you need the willingness to engage in honest, imperfect movement. The cost of your delay is now fully visible to you. You can clearly see that more waiting only guarantees more smallness, and more smallness guarantees a lifetime of heavy, silent regret. You have already paid enough to your fear. You have paid in lost opportunities, in suppressed income, in unspoken truths, and in the quiet ache of knowing you are operating below your capacity. The debt is settled. You do not owe your self-doubt another second of your time. Your future can only be built through immediate physical action. It is built one move at a time, one piece of proof at a time, one cleaner act of self-respect at a time. This is your final challenge. You must stop asking your fear for permission to live your life. You must stop negotiating with the smaller, terrified version of yourself. You must step into the bigger life right now, with your heart pounding and your hands shaking, fully accepting that comfort is the price you pay for freedom. You do not need to eliminate every doubt before you move. You simply need to become someone who moves anyway. That person is not built next year, next month, or tomorrow. That person is built starting with the very next action you take. The door is unlocked. The fog has cleared. The waiting is officially over.